July 4, 1942, 21:11 hours. A naval signal left the transmitter of the Admiralty addressed to convoy PQ-17. The signal contained 12 coded groups. It was acknowledged by the convoy commodore and by escort commanders within minutes. Shortly afterward, merchant vessels began altering course independently. Formation lights disappeared one by one. Within hours, the convoy no longer existed as a unit. At the time of dispersal, 36 merchant ships were at sea. Their last recorded positions formed a compact pattern on operational charts. By the following morning, those positions were scattered across hundreds of miles of Arctic water. Some ships reported continued movement. Others transmitted distress signals. Several ceased all transmissions without reporting contact or damage. Escort vessels were no longer present. Covering forces had altered course to the west. Air reconnaissance continued overhead. Submarine sightings were logged in multiple sectors. Ice reports showed drift closing northern routes. Weather reports indicated fog banks forming unevenly across the area. By nightfall on July 5, fewer than half of the ships were still transmitting. Some signals were cut off mid-message. Others reported fires, flooding, or loss of power. Several ship names appeared once and never again. No consolidated report existed. No single position explained the pattern. Charts continued to be updated with pencil marks and question symbols. In early June 1942, preparations were conducted for an Arctic convoy scheduled to depart from the western approaches and proceed to northern Soviet ports. The convoy was designated PQ-17 according to the established sequence used for eastbound convoys. Assembly points were set at Valfjord in Iceland and at staging anchorages in western Scotland. Merchant vessels assigned to the convoy arrived in staggered fashion, reporting tonnage, cargo manifests, and crew complements through naval control offices. The cargo consisted primarily of military equipment, vehicles, ammunition, fuel, food supplies, and industrial materials allocated under existing intergovernmental agreements. Each vessel was assigned a convoy position number and provided with sailing instructions, recognition signals, and emergency procedures. Naval escort forces were organized into multiple layers. A close escort group composed of destroyers, corvettes, trawlers, and anti-submarine vessels was tasked with direct protection of the merchant formation. A cruiser covering force was positioned at distance to counter surface threats. A further heavy covering force, including battleships, was stationed to the west with orders to intervene against major enemy surface units if required. Air cover was limited by range and weather conditions and was expected to be intermittent beyond certain latitudes. On June 27, 1942, PQ-17 departed Valfjord. The convoy initially consisted of 35 merchant ships, later joined by additional vessels, bringing the total to 36. Weather conditions during departure included low cloud, moderate seas, and variable visibility. Ice reports were transmitted daily, indicating drift ice fields to the north of the planned route. Navigational adjustments were issued accordingly. Convoy speed was set at approximately 8 knots, dictated by the slowest ships. From the first days at sea, standard procedures were maintained. Zigzag patterns were ordered during daylight hours. Blackout conditions were enforced. Wireless silence was observed except for operational signals. Lookouts were posted continuously. Depth charges and anti-aircraft ammunition were inspected and logged. Escorts conducted regular sonar sweeps and altered station as required by sea state. By June 30, the convoy entered waters increasingly exposed to aerial reconnaissance. Enemy aircraft sightings were reported by escort vessels, with position, altitude, and bearing recorded and transmitted. No attacks were made during the initial sightings. The convoy continued on its assigned route under orders issued by Naval Command through encrypted channels. On July 1, the convoy passed east of Jan Mayen Island. Weather deteriorated, with fog banks reducing visibility and complicating station keeping. Several merchant vessels temporarily lost visual contact but regained assigned positions through signaling procedures. Ice warnings were updated. Escorts adjusted screening formations to maintain coverage. On July 2, aerial attacks commenced. Enemy bombers approached in small groups, conducting high-altitude reconnaissance passes before withdrawing. Anti-aircraft fire was not opened unless attack profiles were confirmed. Later the same day, a coordinated bombing attack occurred. Bombs fell near multiple merchant vessels. One ship sustained damage to superstructure and cargo holds. Fires were extinguished, and the vessel remained in formation at reduced speed. Damage reports were compiled and transmitted. Throughout July 3, air attacks increased in frequency. Torpedo bombers approached at low altitude. Several torpedoes were observed running through the convoy lanes. One merchant ship was struck and began listing. Damage control parties attempted to contain flooding. After continued loss of stability, the order was given to abandon ship. Escort vessels recovered survivors. The sinking was recorded with time, position, and estimated cause. Enemy submarine activity was also reported. Sonar contacts were investigated, depth charges deployed, and oil slicks observed, though no confirmed submarine destruction was logged. The convoy maintained course under continuous threat. Intelligence summaries received by higher command indicated the movement of major enemy surface units from Norwegian ports. Reports referenced the presence of heavy ships, including battleships and cruisers, underway or preparing to sortie. These reports were based on aerial reconnaissance, intercepted communications, and agent observations. The information was assessed and disseminated through command channels to convoy commanders and covering forces. On July 4, orders were transmitted to the convoy escort and covering forces. The cruiser covering force was directed to withdraw to the west to avoid engagement with superior enemy surface units. Shortly thereafter, an additional signal was issued instructing the convoy to scatter. The order specified that merchant ships were to proceed independently to Russian ports, using best speed and avoiding known enemy concentrations. Close escort vessels were ordered to withdraw westward. The signal was received by the convoy commodore and escort commanders. Procedures for convoy dispersal were executed. Merchant vessels altered course individually. Some ships turned north toward ice fields, others south toward coastal routes. Wireless silence was partially relaxed to allow navigational and distress communications. Escorts began detaching according to orders, with some vessels remaining temporarily to assist damaged ships. Following dispersal, merchant ships operated independently. Navigational decisions were made by individual masters based on available charts, ice reports, and perceived threat. Some vessels reduced speed to conserve fuel or avoid ice. Others attempted maximum speed runs toward destination ports. Enemy forces continued operations against the scattered ships. Aircraft conducted repeated attacks. Without coordinated anti-aircraft defense, individual ships relied on their own armament. Several vessels were bombed and set ablaze. Others were torpedoed by submarines operating along anticipated routes. Sinkings occurred over a wide area, with positions logged by surviving vessels or later reconstructed from partial reports. On July 5, reports of losses increased. Ships transmitted distress signals before being hit or as they took on water. Some signals were intercepted by friendly stations, others ceased abruptly. Escort vessels that had remained nearby rescued survivors when possible. Many ships, operating alone, had no immediate assistance. Ice conditions influenced outcomes for several vessels. Ships that entered ice fields reduced exposure to air attack but faced navigational hazards. Hull damage from ice was reported. Some ships became trapped or forced to stop engines. Enemy submarines were reported operating near ice edges. Throughout July 6, sinkings continued. Enemy surface units were reported operating further south, though no direct engagement with merchant ships was confirmed in the northern dispersal areas during this period. Air attacks remained the primary threat. Fires aboard several ships burned uncontrolled due to lack of assistance. By July 7, only a small number of merchant vessels remained unaccounted for without confirmed loss or arrival. Surviving ships approached Soviet-controlled waters. Soviet naval units and aircraft provided limited escort near destination ports. Mines were reported along coastal approaches, requiring careful navigation. Over subsequent days, individual ships arrived at Arkhangelsk and Murmansk. Arrival times and cargo conditions were logged. Damage assessments were conducted upon docking. Cargo losses were recorded against manifests. Survivors from sunken ships were disembarked and accounted for. Casualty figures were compiled based on muster rolls and survivor statements. Of the original 36 merchant vessels, 11 reached destination ports. The remainder were sunk or abandoned at sea. Escort vessel losses were limited, though several sustained damage during earlier phases of the voyage. Detailed after-action reports were prepared by naval commands, listing times, positions, enemy contacts, and losses. Communications logs preserved the sequence of orders and signals transmitted during the operation. Navigational charts annotated by surviving ships showed dispersal routes and attack locations. Survivor debriefings provided accounts of individual sinkings, rescue efforts, and conditions at sea. The convoy designation PQ-17 was thereafter marked in operational records with its departure date, assigned route, and final accounting of ships and cargo. Naval commands continued preparations for subsequent convoys under revised procedures, incorporating updated instructions on escort disposition, air cover coordination, and response to surface threat intelligence. Throughout the operation, all movements, orders, and losses were recorded as they occurred, forming a continuous sequence of events documented in logs, reports, and signals generated during the passage of the convoy through contested waters. Following the initial dispersal order transmitted on July 4, 1942, individual merchant vessels continued movement according to independent navigation plans. Each ship operated under its own command authority, maintaining logs that recorded course changes, engine revolutions, fuel consumption, sightings, and actions taken in response to enemy presence. Wireless transmissions were limited to essential signals, including distress calls and navigational warnings, as directed by standing orders. Enemy air reconnaissance intensified across the dispersal area. Aircraft approached singly and in coordinated groups, often at varying altitudes to observe ship movements. Visual identification of merchant vessels was recorded by shipboard lookouts, including bearing, approximate range, aircraft type when discernible, and behavior patterns. Bombing and torpedo attacks followed reconnaissance flights in many instances. On July 5, several ships reported sustained attacks over extended periods. Anti-aircraft ammunition expenditure was logged. Machine gun and light-caliber cannon fire was directed at attacking aircraft during approach phases. Hits were occasionally observed on enemy aircraft, though confirmation of damage or destruction was not possible in most cases due to continued maneuvering and limited visibility. Submarine activity was reported by ships equipped with basic hydrophone gear. Wake sightings and torpedo tracks were observed by lookouts. Evasive maneuvers were undertaken when possible, including course alterations and speed changes. Some ships deployed smoke generators to obscure position, with varying effectiveness depending on wind conditions. One merchant vessel, proceeding on a northeasterly course toward ice cover, reported being attacked by multiple torpedo bombers. 2 torpedoes struck the hull in quick succession, causing immediate flooding of engine and cargo spaces. The vessel lost propulsion and electrical power. Abandoned ship procedures were initiated. Lifeboats were launched under fire. Survivors later reported exposure to cold water and ice debris. Rescue did not occur immediately, and the fate of several crew members remained unrecorded. Another ship, steering southward to avoid known ice fields, encountered an enemy submarine at periscope depth. A torpedo was fired and missed astern. The vessel altered course sharply and increased speed. A second torpedo struck amidships, detonating cargo. Fire spread rapidly through the superstructure. The ship sank within minutes. A small number of crew escaped on rafts. No escort vessels were present in the area at the time. Ice navigation continued to affect ships attempting northern routes. Reports indicated reduced maneuverability due to pack ice. Engines were frequently stopped and started to avoid hull damage. Lookouts were assigned additional duties to monitor ice movement. Fog compounded navigational difficulty. Ships proceeding independently lacked icebreaker support. On July 6, enemy aircraft conducted repeated attacks on isolated ships. One vessel was bombed multiple times, sustaining near misses that caused hull breaches below the waterline. Pumps were engaged continuously. Crew members were assigned to damage control stations without relief. Eventually, flooding exceeded pumping capacity. The ship was abandoned. Survivors reported prolonged exposure before rescue by a Soviet patrol vessel days later. Soviet naval forces operating from northern ports increased patrol activity along coastal approaches. Minesweepers cleared limited channels. Aircraft conducted reconnaissance flights over expected approach routes. Communication between Soviet units and incoming merchant ships was intermittent due to range and weather conditions. Several ships nearing Soviet-controlled waters encountered minefields. Charts indicated known defensive mine placements, but drifting mines were also reported. Ships reduced speed and followed prescribed channels when possible. One vessel struck a mine near the entrance to a harbor, sustaining severe damage but remaining afloat. Crew and cargo were later evacuated. Throughout this period, naval command centers continued to receive fragmented reports. Loss confirmations were delayed due to lack of surviving witnesses or incomplete transmissions. Some ships were initially listed as missing, pending further information. Signals intelligence tracked enemy aircraft sorties and submarine patrol patterns, though real-time coordination with scattered merchant ships was limited. Covering forces that had withdrawn westward remained at readiness. Reports from these forces logged fuel status, weather conditions, and enemy sightings. No engagement with major enemy surface units occurred during this phase. The heavy covering force maintained patrol stations according to revised orders. By July 7, the number of active merchant ships decreased significantly. Some vessels had ceased transmission after reporting attacks. Others continued sending position reports as they advanced. Soviet authorities prepared to receive incoming ships, allocating berths and arranging offloading priorities based on cargo type. Survivor recovery operations continued when possible. Escort vessels and patrol craft recovered crew from lifeboats and rafts. Medical treatment was administered for exposure, injuries, and burns. Survivor statements were collected upon arrival at port or escort vessel debriefing rooms. These statements recorded times of attack, enemy methods, and ship responses. Weather conditions varied across the operational area. Fog persisted in northern sectors, while clearer skies allowed increased enemy air activity further south. Sea states ranged from moderate to rough, affecting lifeboat survivability and rescue efforts. Water temperatures remained near freezing. By July 8, the majority of surviving ships had either reached port or were within coastal escort range. Final attacks occurred near approach routes, including bombing of ships within sight of land. One vessel was sunk less than a day's sail from harbor, following a coordinated air attack. Arrival logs at Arkhangelsk and Murmansk recorded ship names, arrival times, damage status, and cargo condition. Cargo unloading began immediately upon docking. Priority was given to ammunition, fuel, and vehicles. Damaged ships were assessed for repair capability. Some were deemed unfit for immediate return voyages. Operational reports compiled during this phase included summaries of enemy activity, losses, and navigation challenges. These reports were transmitted to higher command and archived. The sequence of events from dispersal to final arrivals was reconstructed from logs, signals, and survivor accounts, forming an ongoing record without alteration or commentary. The operational status of the convoy designation was updated as ships were confirmed lost or arrived. Merchant shipping registers were amended accordingly. Families of crew members were notified through official channels as information became available. No comprehensive accounting was issued during this period beyond internal naval documentation. Naval planning for subsequent convoys proceeded concurrently, with adjustments to escort arrangements under consideration. Existing orders remained in force until formally amended. Communications regarding future operations were handled separately from the ongoing accounting of the dispersed convoy. The period following dispersal remained marked by continued enemy action, independent ship operations, and fragmented reporting, all recorded in contemporaneous documents generated during active operations at sea and in coastal command centers. During the period beginning July 9, 1942, remaining merchant vessels still underway operated under individual navigation and defense conditions. Ship logs from this phase record extended intervals without external contact, punctuated by sudden enemy engagements. Courses were adjusted frequently in response to ice sightings, aircraft approaches, and estimated submarine operating areas transmitted through delayed intelligence summaries. Several ships maintained northern routes along the ice edge. These vessels reported reduced aerial contact due to low cloud cover and fog but continued to encounter navigational hazards. Ice pressure against hulls caused structural strain. Crews were assigned to continuous watch at bow stations to signal ice movement. Engines were kept at reduced revolutions to allow rapid maneuvering. Soundings were taken when feasible to confirm depth near drifting ice fields. One vessel recorded prolonged engine stoppage after propeller damage from ice contact. Repairs were attempted at sea using available tools and materials. Temporary measures allowed limited propulsion to be restored. During this interval, the ship remained stationary for several hours. No enemy contact was reported during the stoppage. The ship resumed movement at reduced speed under continued fog conditions. Ships that chose more southerly tracks encountered sustained air activity. Reconnaissance aircraft were sighted at regular intervals. Attacks were often conducted by small formations approaching from sunward positions. Bomb release patterns were recorded as near-miss clusters designed to bracket targets. Ships maneuvered independently, altering course sharply during attack runs. Anti-aircraft crews maintained readiness despite fatigue and ammunition constraints. On one vessel, repeated bombing caused structural damage to deck fittings and ruptured fuel lines. Fires were contained through isolation of compartments and use of portable extinguishers. Fuel leakage continued, increasing fire risk. The vessel remained afloat and proceeded under reduced power. Continuous smoke emission from damaged sections was noted in the log. Submarine threats persisted across dispersal zones. Several ships reported periscope sightings at long range. Torpedo tracks were observed in multiple instances. Without escort support, evasive action consisted primarily of emergency turns and speed changes. One ship successfully avoided 2 torpedoes through rapid maneuvering. A third torpedo struck the stern, disabling steering gear. Emergency steering procedures were implemented using differential engine thrust. The vessel continued on altered course until flooding forced abandonment. Crew evacuation occurred under calm sea conditions. Survivors later reported limited provisions and extended exposure before rescue. Search and rescue operations during this phase were sporadic. Soviet patrol craft, trawlers, and auxiliary vessels conducted sweeps near coastal approaches and known sinking locations when notified. Weather and limited information reduced effectiveness. Several lifeboats were recovered days after sinkings, with survivors suffering from exposure and dehydration. Medical personnel documented injuries and conditions upon recovery. Communications traffic from naval command centers reflected ongoing uncertainty regarding ship status. Loss reports were provisional, often based on last known positions and unconfirmed distress signals. Updates were issued as new information arrived. Some ships initially reported lost were later confirmed to have reached port after extended silence. Enemy surface units were intermittently reported through reconnaissance summaries, though no direct encounters with isolated merchant ships were confirmed during this period in northern sectors. Air operations remained the primary method of attack. Aircraft losses on the enemy side were occasionally claimed by ship crews but remained unverified. On July 10, Soviet coastal air units increased patrol frequency over approach routes. Fighter aircraft were sighted providing limited cover. Anti-aircraft coordination between ships and shore units was minimal due to communication constraints. Nevertheless, some attacks were disrupted by the presence of defending aircraft. Several ships arrived at Arkhangelsk under tow, having sustained damage to propulsion systems. Harbor authorities recorded entry times, tug assignments, and berthing arrangements. Emergency repairs were initiated to stabilize hulls and prevent sinking at dock. Cargo unloading proceeded concurrently when possible. Damaged cargo was separated and documented. Murmansk port records similarly logged arrivals. Congestion at berths required some ships to anchor temporarily before docking. Air raid alerts were frequent. Ships at anchor maintained readiness for immediate movement. Cargo unloading was conducted under blackout conditions during night hours and interrupted during alarms. Survivor processing followed established procedures. Crew members were registered, medically examined, and assigned temporary accommodation. Statements were collected regarding ship loss circumstances, enemy actions, and navigation decisions. These statements were transcribed and forwarded through naval channels without analysis or annotation. By July 11, the number of merchant vessels still unaccounted for decreased further. Remaining missing ships were presumed overdue. No additional distress signals were received from these vessels. Patrols continued for a limited period before being reassigned. Internal naval correspondence during this phase focused on logistical accounting. Cargo tonnage delivered was compared against original manifests. Loss figures were updated. Escort fuel consumption and ammunition expenditure were summarized. Maintenance requirements for escort vessels returning from operations were logged. Weather reports indicated gradual improvement in visibility in northern sectors, with continued fog in isolated areas. Sea states moderated, improving conditions for small craft operations. Ice drift reports showed gradual movement northward, reducing immediate navigational hazards near some approach routes. The operational record for the convoy continued to be assembled incrementally. Each arrival, loss confirmation, and survivor report was appended to existing files. No consolidated narrative was produced during this period. Documentation consisted of discrete entries generated by ships, ports, and command centers as events occurred. Planning staffs issued routine operational messages unrelated to the dispersed convoy, maintaining separation between ongoing operations and the accounting of losses. Standing orders remained unchanged pending formal review. The period concluded with active movements reduced to harbor operations, survivor recovery, and administrative reporting. Merchant ships that had arrived were secured alongside or anchored under Port Authority control. Crews awaited further instructions. Naval commands continued to monitor the situation through standard reporting channels as the immediate movement phase came to an end. In the days after the last arrivals were entered into port registers, naval control offices in the United Kingdom, Iceland, and the Soviet North continue to handle traffic that consists largely of fragmentary signals, overdue ship notices, and administrative amendments. Merchant ship masters who have reached Arkhangelsk or Murmansk submit written statements through naval liaison channels describing dispersal actions, course decisions, times of air or submarine contact, and the moment of separation from other ships. These statements are forwarded by cipher to the appropriate authorities together with extracts from deck logs, gunnery records, and damage control notes where those documents have been preserved through the passage. Escort commanders returning to Western bases submit their own action reports in the standard format, with appended tables listing sightings, estimated enemy strength, depth charge attacks, and ammunition expenditure. Escort ship logs include the time the dispersal order is received, the acknowledgement transmission, the alteration of course to the west, and any rescue actions performed before withdrawal. Where survivors have been taken aboard escorts, the ship's sick bay log records treatment given for immersion, burns, fractures, and exposure. Names are checked against muster lists and the survivors' ships are entered on missing lists maintained by Naval Control. In the Admiralty signal offices, the sequence of messages on July 4 is extracted from communications records. Signal copies are compared with routing logs to confirm time of origin, time of relay, and time of receipt at subordinate commands. Command staffs assemble these documents with situation plots maintained by operations rooms, including the last convoy position reports received before dispersal and subsequent independent position reports from ships still transmitting. In the same period, intelligence summaries continue to arrive concerning enemy heavy units in Norwegian waters, based on reconnaissance photographs, reports from aircraft, and intercepted traffic. These are appended to the operational file and circulated to senior officers responsible for convoy routing and covering force deployment. At northern Soviet ports, harbor authorities and naval liaison officers maintain arrival tables for ships that have survived. Each arrival is examined for damage and seaworthiness. Engines are inspected, steering gear tested, and hull plating checked for bomb splinters or mine damage. Ammunition expended by shipboard anti-aircraft guns is tallied. Cargo holds are opened under supervision to identify water damage, fire damage, and shifted loads. Vehicles are unloaded and counted against manifests. In cases where cargo is missing due to jettisoning during damage control, the ship's log entries are copied and included in the port report. Ships that arrive with casualties submit lists of dead and wounded. Wounded crew members are transferred to medical facilities. Deaths at sea are entered with time and circumstances if known. For ships lost without survivors, the missing lists remain unchanged except where neutral or enemy broadcasts, if received, provide names of prisoners or survivors recovered by enemy units. Such information is logged, marked as unconfirmed unless supported by additional reporting, and distributed through the relevant channels. In the western approaches and in Iceland, staff offices update convoy records. The convoy commodore's report is received and placed alongside escort reports. The dispersed tracks of ships are reconstructed as far as existing reports allow. Where the last known position is derived from a distress signal, that signal is copied in full. Where a ship ceases to report without a distress signal, the last scheduled position report is used. Blank entries remain for ships whose course and fate are unknown beyond the dispersal point. Air and submarine attack records are cross-referenced against known enemy operations. Coastal Command and Fleet Air Arm Operations rooms compile sortie lists for any patrols that sight burning ships, floating wreckage, or survivors. Reports of oil slicks, rafts, and lifeboats are forwarded to rescue authorities when practicable. The limitations of range and the competing demands of other operations restrict the scope of searches. Weather reports are attached to each search plan, noting visibility, sealing, sea state, and the likely drift of survivors based on wind and current estimates. In the same weeks, communications traffic records continued enemy air activity over northern Soviet ports, including air raid warnings and the appearance of enemy aircraft over Murmansk approaches. Ships at anchor or alongside maintain anti-aircraft watches. Unloading is interrupted during alerts and resumed when the signal for all clear is received. Port damage reports are filed when bombs fall within dock areas or when fragments strike ships already damaged at sea. Operational messages circulate concerning the scheduling of subsequent convoys. Staff officers prepare routing alternatives, including northern tracks nearer the ice edge and southern tracks nearer the Norwegian coast, with risks logged under the categories of air attack, submarine attack, and surface attack. Escort availability is reviewed, with destroyers and corvettes listed by readiness state, fuel endurance, and repair requirements. Requests for additional close escort and for increased fighter cover at critical points are prepared in the standard correspondence format and sent through the established chain. In mid-July, further intelligence signals indicate that enemy heavy units are in fjords and that movement out of Norwegian bases is not confirmed in current reporting. These signals are distributed to operational staffs with time stamps and source designations. No amendment is issued to the record of the July 4 dispersal signal on the basis of these later summaries. The standing operational file continues to consist of the messages as they were transmitted, the acknowledgements as they were received, and the action reports written by those executing the orders. At the same time, individual merchant crews remain in port under varying conditions. Some ships begin repairs immediately, with welding teams working on hull breaches and engineers replacing damaged machinery parts where spares can be sourced. Other ships are classed as requiring dockyard work beyond the capacity of local facilities and are held pending further instruction. Crew discipline and watch routines continue. Masters receive new orders regarding future sailing, subject to availability of escorts and clearance of mine channels. In the United Kingdom, shipping ministries and naval authorities coordinate notifications to families through official channels. Names remain on missing lists until confirmed dead, confirmed alive, or confirmed captured. The administrative process is handled through forms and registries, with dates of last contact and ship identification entered. Where survivor testimony identifies a crew member last seen on board at the moment of sinking, that detail is recorded without alteration. Where no testimony exists, the entry remains as missing. Salvage activity is limited. Reports from aircraft and patrol vessels indicate scattered wreckage fields, oil patches, and floating cargo, but most locations lie beyond practical reach under continuing threat. A small number of lifeboats and rafts are recovered when drift brings them within coastal patrol routes. Each recovery generates a report with position, time, number of survivors, condition on recovery, and any statements given immediately after rescue. Those statements are often limited to ship name, approximate sinking time, and number of men lost, due to the physical condition of survivors at the time of first questioning. As administrative work proceeds, convoy control offices maintain the standard separation between operational signals and the accounting of losses. Routine traffic continues for other naval movements. Escort vessels are reassigned after refueling and repair. Merchant ship routing orders are revised for ships returning westward from Soviet ports, with emphasis on avoiding known patrol zones and minimizing exposure near the Norwegian coast. Return voyages are planned under separate designations, with their own sailing instructions and escort assignments. By late July and into August 1942, the operational record for the dispersed convoy is substantially complete in its main entries, though gaps remain where ships have not transmitted beyond a certain point and no survivors have been recovered. The file consists of convoy sailing orders, intelligence summaries received before and during the passage, the dispersal signal and related instructions, the action reports of escorts and surviving merchants, port arrival records, casualty lists, and rescue reports. Each document is filed by date and time of origin. The status of each ship is carried forward in convoy summaries as arrived, sunk, abandoned, or missing, pending further information received through routine channels. As August 1942 proceeds, clerical sections responsible for convoy accounting continue to maintain daily status boards. Entries for ships listed as missing are reviewed against any new arrivals, prisoner reports, and intercept summaries. Naval control offices receive occasional delayed signals forwarded from Soviet authorities concerning survivors landed from small craft recoveries or from isolated shore landings along the coast. Each such message is routed to the appropriate registry sections. Where names match those already carried as missing, the status line is amended to safe with the date and place of reporting. Where a ship name is confirmed by survivor statement as sunk at a given position and time, the ship's record is marked accordingly and linked to the survivor deposition reference number. Merchant ship masters and senior officers of the surviving vessels remain subject to reporting requirements. Written accounts are taken in the established form, beginning with time of sailing, convoy station, time of first enemy contact, course alterations, gunnery actions, damage, and final arrival. These accounts are not standardized in language beyond the required headings. Clerical staff transcribe or copy extracts, attach any navigational charts retained, and forward them through naval liaison to the central file. Some accounts include precise entries on the receipt of signals and the time of execution of the dispersal order, including whether the signal was received in clear or by code group, and whether any repeat was requested. Where requested by command authorities, signal logs are produced from the ship's wireless office showing time of receipt and time of acknowledgement. In the escort forces, destroyer and corvette crews who had recovered survivors provide supplementary notes. These notes include the position where lifeboats were sighted, the number of men taken aboard, the condition of clothing and equipment, and any immediate statements made regarding attacks. Medical officers provide separate memoranda, listing symptoms consistent with immersion and exposure, and the measures used for rewarming and treatment aboard. Where fatalities occur after rescue, the time and circumstances are entered in ship's medical log and the names are notified through naval channels. Operational staffs in the United Kingdom continue to correlate convoy events with intelligence traffic. Reconnaissance reports concerning enemy heavy units in Norwegian waters are compared against the time sequence of orders. Photographic interpretation sections file prints and interpretation sheets with annotations of ship types, berths, and any observed movement. Intercept sections provide time-stamped summaries indicating enemy communications patterns, including transmissions associated with air reconnaissance and U-boat reporting. These documents are appended without alteration to the operational file for the convoy passage and are used in briefing notes for subsequent sailings. Simultaneously, preparations continue for the next eastbound convoy. Escort availability is reviewed in light of refits, repairs, and losses. Destroyer flotillas report readiness states, with attention to fuel endurance and the condition of sonar and radar sets. Anti-aircraft ammunition stocks are checked. Additional trawlers and corvettes are assigned to close escort duties where available. Coastal Command and Naval Aviation authorities discuss patrol schedules for the approaches, with attention to maximum range over northern waters. Weather forecasting sections provide expected patterns, including fog probability and wind direction, which are relevant to both air cover and smoke use by ships. The dispersal signal itself remains in circulation within operational communications as part of the file. Copies are distributed to commands responsible for drafting convoy instructions. Signal offices preserve original routing slips and transmission stamps. Where discrepancies exist between time of origin and time of receipt at different units, those differences are noted in the message handling record. No single consolidated narrative is issued to operating units beyond routine lessons transmitted in amended instructions, which are phrased as operational directions rather than commentary. In Soviet ports, unloading operations continue at pace, constrained by berth availability, labor allocation, and air raid interruptions. Cargo received is counted and listed. Any shortages are recorded against ship manifests. Damaged vehicles are inspected and segregated. Ammunition that has been exposed to seawater is identified for further handling by the receiving authorities. Fuel and lubricants are transferred to storage facilities under supervision. Port authorities compile weekly summaries of tonnage discharged, labor hours, and incidents, including any air raid damage to dock installations or ships. Merchant crews remain under orders regarding ship security and readiness. Watches are posted for fire and sabotage prevention according to port regulations. Damaged ships that are to be repaired locally are moved into positions that allow access to cranes and workshops. Repair parties remove splinter damage, patch shell holes, and replace rigging and deck fittings. Engineers work on pumps, auxiliary generators, and steering gear. For ships requiring major dockyard work not available locally, temporary measures are used to keep the hull watertight pending further movement orders. For missing ships, the process of establishing fate continues through standard channels. Where survivors from another ship report seeing an explosion, fire, or sinking of a named vessel, the statement is recorded and filed. Where no named witness exists, the ship remains listed as missing or presumed lost based on time overdue and the operational environment. Administrative offices treat each case separately. Families are notified only when status changes are supported by official confirmation under existing regulations. During the same period, Soviet coastal patrols and local authorities occasionally report debris or lifeboats washed ashore. Such findings generate brief reports stating location, date, and identifying marks if present. These reports are transmitted through liaison channels. When a lifeboat bears a ship name or registration, that information is entered into the file. Personal effects recovered are inventoried. Identification of remains, if any, is handled under local procedures and communicated where possible. In September 1942, with other convoy operations ongoing, file maintenance continues. Clerical staff consolidate duplicates, ensure that signal copies match cipher registers, and index action reports by ship and date. Where ships have returned westward and submit additional reports upon arrival at British ports, these are added as supplementary documents. Return voyage logs include observations of wreckage fields and oil patches in the general area of prior losses, recorded with position and date. Such observations are logged as navigational and operational notes without further treatment. Naval commands issue revised standing orders for convoy conduct. These include instructions on maintaining closer escort coordination, the handling of suspected surface threats, and the conditions under which dispersal may be authorized. The orders are circulated as amendments to existing convoy instructions. They specify signal formats and the chain of authority for issuing such signals. They also include guidance on radio discipline, including circumstances in which merchant ships may transmit position reports while operating independently. These documents are filed separately from the convoy record but referenced by date in planning notes for future sailings. Throughout late 1942, operational rooms continue to display Norwegian coastal movements based on reconnaissance, with particular attention to heavy unit berths. Reports of U-boat concentrations are disseminated to convoy commanders. Weather summaries for the Barents Sea and the approaches to Murmansk are circulated daily. These operational materials form the routine context in which convoy planning proceeds. The earlier convoy file remains available as a reference set of signals, reports, and registries. In the Merchant Shipping Administration, compensation and allotment records are adjusted based on confirmed casualty status. Insurance and shipping company correspondence is handled through established wartime channels. Owners receive formal notification of loss when the ship is confirmed sunk or presumed lost according to regulatory timeframes. The notices list the ship name, last known position or reported sinking position, and the date of the last contact. Cargo claims are handled in separate files, with quantities delivered and quantities lost stated from manifests and receiving port counts. Survivors who are fit for duty are processed for reassignment. Some are assigned to other ships in port. Others await transport to return to their home countries or to join new crews. Medical follow-up is recorded where required. Statements taken earlier are retained. Further questioning occurs when new inquiries arise, typically focused on times of signal receipt, identification of attackers, and sequence of damage control measures. At sea, scattered individual actions continue to be reported by later convoys and patrols. Ships transiting the Arctic route report occasional sighting of wreckage and floating cargo. These reports include time, position, and general description. Where items are identifiable as belonging to a known lost ship, the report is forwarded to registry sections. No recovery operations are generally undertaken due to risk and distance, except where survivors are believed present. By the end of 1942, the administrative status for the convoy's merchant ships is carried in summary tables maintained by Naval Control. Each entry lists ship name, tonnage, cargo type, sailing date, last convoy position, last independent position if any, and final status. The tables are updated when new confirmations arrive. The operational file remains composed of contemporaneous documents, sailing orders, escort dispositions, intelligence summaries received during operations, signal traffic, action reports, survivor statements, port arrival and unloading reports, casualty lists, and subsequent registry amendments. Handling notes show the date each document is received and the office to which it is routed. In parallel, operational commands continue to issue orders for convoy movements as the Arctic route remains active. Escort and covering forces are assigned according to current estimates of enemy capability and movement. The procedures used for communication, formation, and emergency response are reiterated in daily instructions. Merchant ship masters are briefed on the requirement to keep station, maintain blackout, and report contacts only as authorized. Gunnery drills and damage control drills are required during the passage, with logs maintained. For those ships that did not return, the file remains open to further information. The status of certain crew members is amended when prisoner lists are received through neutral intermediaries or through official channels. Names are checked against missing lists and updated. Where no information is received, the registry entries remain unchanged beyond the administrative designations used for missing and presumed lost personnel. The convoy control offices continue their routine functions. Signals are received and logged. Messages are routed and filed. Reports arrive from ships and ports, each bearing the date and time of origin. The record of the convoy that sailed and did not return as a formation remains a set of entries written at the time by those who issued orders, those who received them, and those who acted under them, preserved in operational and administrative files maintained during wartime conditions.